Evening, folks. Thought I would continue on with my live Bible studies here. If you're able to join me either now live or later on, if you want to add comments, if you're watching this on the replay, that'd be great. Again, I'm going to be reading Genesis 2. I'm going to be looking at the King James, and I'll have the ESV up for a more modern translation. If I need to, I'll go to the Hebrew to get more precision on the translation. Just a reminder, this is Moses writing this. He's writing in the midst of the 40 years of wandering to a bunch of ex-slaves. He is setting up a theocratic nation that has both a physical civil law and a spiritual law all wrapped up together. And the purpose of this writing is to preserve that nation, and it's supposed to preserve it for the purpose of fulfilling the promise to Abraham to bring the Messiah into the world. That was the whole purpose of the Israelite nation. So Genesis 1, we saw the creation, and we described why it had to be literal days, and how we're at the last day, the seventh day of creation. Sun's up and the Earth's orbiting it, the Earth's rotating, so we're talking about days here that are 24 hours, and everything's been made. So Genesis 2 verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. So the heavens, we talked about that there's three kinds that are literal, and there's one that's figurative. The two heavens that are created during the creation week are the sky and space, where everything else is, stars and galaxies and all the things we know that exist out there. And then the earth, the central planet in terms of God's plan, the origin of his greatest creation, which is humans. It says, on the seventh day that God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And that word rested there just means that it's a cessation. It's a stopping of work. God is omnipotent. He doesn't have energy to run out of. He could keep going. But for his purposes, for the reason that he created the universe, he saw that it was very good. That doesn't mean there weren't some things in it that we, as humans, in our finite perspective, are going to see as good things. We'll see here that I believe death was a part of that creation, entropy, those kinds of things. But for the purposes of creating a creature to have a relationship with him, everything was very good. Everything was perfect in the way that it needed to be for God's purpose, for God's plan. And for us in our finite, limited perception of things, to question any of that is foolishness. It's silly to say, well, God, I don't think you could have done this better, you could have done that better, I don't think you did it right. How silly is that? How arrogant is that? We just don't have the perspective for that. But God didn't get tired and have to shut things down. He just stopped his work. He stopped his labor. He finished the work that he intended to do. Verse 3, and God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. So again, when are we reading this? The first readers are reading this after they've crossed the Red Sea, and they are out wandering in the wilderness, and Moses is setting up Moses is setting up this nation. So who's the first people that are hearing about the sanctifying of the Sabbath? As far as we know, it's Moses, because we don't actually read about any of the people from Adam through Moses up until the Israelite nation is coming out of Egypt. we don't read about anybody keeping the Sabbath day. Hey, John, welcome. We're just reading in Genesis 2 right now. So as far as we know from what we read, and we can only draw conclusions from what we read, as far as we know, the first people to keep the Sabbath are the Israelites. Adam, we don't have any record that Adam did, that Abel or Cain or Seth did. We don't have any record of Noah or Abraham, any of those guys remembering the Sabbath and keeping it holy. We only read of the Israelites doing it. And so Moses is writing here to those people, and this is the first that they're hearing of why they have to keep it. We read again in Exodus chapter 20, that same thing. So it says, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God had made the earth and the heavens. Now that's an interesting verse there, because mankind came up with the chapters and mankind came up with the verses, and we read day 1 through 6 as chapter 1. Then we read day 7 as chapter 2, and then suddenly there's a transition. We're no longer just talking about Elohim, the Trinity creator, Godhead. Well, now we're reading about Jehovah God. And if you're reading along in the King James, the King James often, almost always, in fact, translates the word Jehovah into Lord. I will be saying Jehovah a lot, because that is the name of God, Iova or Yahweh, or depending on what language. I speak English, so I'm just going to say Jehovah, but Jehovah God made the earth and the heavens, and Moses is transitioning here. He is going from this all-powerful, omniscient creator of the universe to now a personal God. And there's a lot of people that want to say, well, Genesis 2 is a different creation account. It's a separate myth, and there's actually 2 creation accounts. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to fit evolution into the Bible. And it just doesn't fit. No matter how they try to twist it, you can't put a square peg in a round hole. It just doesn't work. And so what we're seeing here is God talking about to Moses. He's saying, now this is what happened essentially on day 6. So Genesis 2 is about day 6, and I want you to pay attention that there aren't any time elements in this so much as there are concept elements. This is thematic in the way that it's presented. So verse 5, and every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew, for Jehovah God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground. So here the plants already exist, so we're already past at least day 3. And it says that there isn't a rain on the earth. And this goes back to the idea of that canopy, that protective canopy that was surrounding the earth to protect us from UV radiation. The pressure would have prevented the water cycle from happening the way that we know it. There wouldn't have been the ability for the evaporation to go up and create clouds. You would have just had the mist, and the pressure would have kept all the clouds near the ground. And so that's where the mist would come from. And so verse 7, it says, and Jehovah God formed man of the dust of the ground. Oh, sorry, I skipped verse 6. But there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. And Jehovah God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So this is day 6. This goes back to verse 26 and 27. Let us make man in our image. So physically, we're formed of the dust. That's just the chemical, biological self. And we're going to read a whole lot about that side of us in the Bible. Paul talks about it in Romans 7 and 8, that there's a side of him that does what he doesn't want to do, and then there's a side of him that wants to do what's right, but he doesn't. And it's this war between the physical self, the biological self, what they call the natural or the flesh or the carnal self. And then there's the spiritual self, the side of us that's made in the image of God. And it's that side of us that comprehends spiritual things. It's that side of us that is able to read the Bible, understand it, and be convinced by it, come to faith, Romans 10:17, and to respond to it. And so, man, I am dry tonight, I tell you. It's this winter weather. I'm not used to it. Texas and Florida don't have this kind of weather, but anyway. And so we have the two aspects of man. We have the physical self, and then he became a living soul. He's like God. He's a spiritual being now. John 4:24 says that God is a spirit. So man becomes like God in nature, in the sense of being a spiritual being. And Jehovah God planted a garden eastward in Eden. Now, note, the plants already exist. The plants are already there. So this is not saying when he planted the garden. Okay, if we understand the plants, when they were created day 3, and he planted a garden eastward in Eden. When did he do that? It's not saying here. It's just saying that that's what God did. And then it also said that God put man, whom he formed, in it. And out of the ground made Jehovah God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. When did he do that? Doesn't say. It just says that he does it. The tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, I want to talk about the tree of life for just a minute, and we'll probably hit on this again when we get to chapter 3. What is the purpose of the tree of life? There's a lot of people who say that before Adam sinned, there was no physical death. That Adam's sin brought physical death into the world. Well, if that's the case, there's no purpose for the tree of life. The tree of life does nothing before Adam sinned. And then, when Adam sins, God kicks him out of the garden. They don't have access to the tree of life anymore, so it doesn't have any purpose after. So, if there is no physical death, then what's the purpose of the tree of life? On top of that, when God tells Adam, the day that you eat of this, you will surely die, how does Adam know what that means? If there's no physical death, he's like, okay, God, you used a word, I don't know what that means, but sure, I'm going to die, whatever that means. And that's not the case. So God designed us to expire. He designed entropy as part of the design. Things have to eat to live. They had to eat at least plants to continue to live. What would happen if Adam and Eve didn't eat? Even though God had given them the plants for food that we saw in Genesis chapter 1. What would happen if the animals didn't eat? They would die. And they were designed to die. That's just the way it is. The other part of this is that before Adam sinned, what would death do? Death would just be a transition to be with God. It would just be a transition into eternity. It wouldn't be a bad thing. It just would be a thing. It would be part of life. It was, okay, you've expired, and now you're moving on, and you're in eternity now, and yay. It's, to live as Christ, die as gain is what Paul says. It's a good thing to die when you have a right relationship with God. And Adam had a right relationship with God. So death is not a bad thing before the fall. And it's only our perspective after Adam sins that we see death as a bad, scary thing. And it's because we have to contend with sin. And we know that if we die and we are lost, then it's a really bad thing. It's an eternally bad thing. And so we need to understand from the right perspective that physical death can be a blessing in the right context. So, and then God also creates the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So verse 10, and a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it was parted and became into 4 heads. The name of the first is Pison, that is it which compasses the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold in that land is good, and there is bdellium and onyx stone. And the name of the second river is Gihon, and the same is that encompasses the whole land of Ethiopia. And the name of the third is Hiddekel, and that which goes toward the east of Assyria, and the fourth river is Euphrates. Now, understand again who is writing and who is reading. Moses is writing the Israelites are reading. So Moses is describing an area of the land right around Mesopotamia that these Israelites would understand. They would know this place. They would know this location. Okay? They could go to this location. And so this isn't something that is something that got washed away in the flood, that is no longer there. Okay, Moses, what are you talking about? We don't know any of these places. He knows all of these places. The Israelites know all these places. So we're not reading about something that is just completely beyond their grasp. It says in verse 15, and Jehovah God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. And Jehovah God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat. Why? Why does he need to eat? If he can't die, why does he need to eat? Okay? But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of it, for in the day, right then, in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. Well, how does Adam know what that means? Okay, God, you said I'm going to die. What does that mean? But if Adam already understands what it means, because perhaps he can watch animals die as they get old. He understands that if he doesn't keep eating of the tree of life, that he's going to die in a physical sense. And then God says to him, the moment you eat of this, you will surely die. Well, what is God talking about? Adam takes a bite and he kills over because it's physically poisoning? No, we're going to see in Genesis 3 that that's not what he's talking about at all. He's talking about spiritual death. It'll be a separation from God, which is an entirely different idea. It's the other aspect of man that's going to die. Not the dust part, but the spirit part. And we'll talk about what that means when we get there. Verse 18, and Jehovah God said, it's not good that man should be alone. I will make him a help meet for him. It's not help meet. It's not one word. That's not the way that works. It's a help. God's making a help that is meet, or that is comparable or companion, complementary to, I think is one of the best ways to say it, is a helper that's complementary for him. And so there's no such thing as a helpmeet. That's a silly word. But God's going to make a help that is comparable for him, or meet for him. And out of the ground Jehovah God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air. When did God do this? Don't know. Okay, the beast of the field we know were created on day 6, so he could be doing this right now, but we know that God created them first, because that's what it says in Genesis 1. So he probably created them earlier that day. But then you have the fowl of the air, which were day 5. But this verse does not say when God created them. It just says that God formed all of these things and then brought them to Adam once Adam was created, and God saw that he needed a helper. So he brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them, and whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a help meet for him, or comparable for him. One of the big arguments that the atheists make is that there's no way that Adam can name every species. Then they set some reasonable time for him to name, and then they talk about how many species there are on the planet, and they say there's no way that Adam could have named every species. And I agree. There's no way that Adam could have named every species, but that's not what it says. God created kinds. So Adam didn't have to name every species of cat. He just named cat. He just named dog. He just named what we would call dragon or dinosaur. Okay? He doesn't have to name every particular species. He only has to name kinds, which wouldn't even take him a day. You can sit in biology class and you can talk about the classifications, the broad general classifications of animals, and you can do that in a 50-minute period. So it doesn't take long, and so Adam could have easily named every kind of land and air animal. Plus, he didn't have to name all the fish. And notice, he's naming all of the cattle and all of the beasts and all of the fowl. He doesn't have to name the creeping things. Most species are bugs. When you look at all of the numbers of species of things that are found in the world, the majority of them are bugs in terms of things that we see and interact with. So Adam didn't have to name the bugs. Okay, he just had to name birds. He just had to name the beast, the wild beast, and the cattle, the ox and stuff. So not that big of a deal, easily done, not a contradiction and not an impossibility, as some people will allege. But anyway, none of those were comparable for Adam. They were not complementary to them because, number one, they didn't have a soul. There isn't a way that an animal relates to a human the way that another human does. And this is, I think this is probably something that would get me into trouble these days, because there's a lot of people that put animals on par with humans. You know, they talk about how this is my fur baby, or this is, I would rather rescue my pet dog than some stranger's kid. Or, you look at the atrocious abortion rates. It's just another animal, right? Why not? We have a child in the womb that's got some defect. Well, it's just an animal, put it down. And that's the sad thing, that people have come to devalue humans, which are the capstone of God's creation and the only thing that God created that is like him. And that's why Adam couldn't find anybody or any living thing that was compatible with him or companion to him, is because none of those things had a soul. They were all biological. They only had a biological nature. They were programmed by their biology, their instincts. In what kind of conversation is Adam really going to have with his dog? Sure, you can talk to your dog and you can anthropomorphize your animals and your pets, and that doesn't mean you can't love them. But you can't have the kind of relationship with your pet or with an animal that you can with another human being. It's just not possible. And so, because of that, verse 21, and Jehovah God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. We're still in day 6 here. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which Jehovah God had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. There's a lot of people that try to get crazy with some of their attempted apologetics. And they'll talk about how man is missing a rib, has one less rib than women do, or whatever. Adam had the full set of genetics that was a man. He had the complete normal set. So if Adam existed before this moment in time, he had the same number of ribs I do. I haven't lost any of my ribs. If God took one of those ribs, then Adam spent the rest of his days one rib short. And that would have been a reminder of what he did or what he lost in order to gain Eve. There isn't any other way to think about it. There's not somehow men are weird and we don't have a rib, or we're all missing a rib. Don't read into the text more than what's already there. Okay? Hey Caleb, welcome. We're about to finish up Genesis 2. We're in verse 21 at the moment. So, and Jehovah God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which Jehovah God had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave or cling, hold fast is what the ESV says, unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. So just to wrap up a few things here. Biologically, woman is the same kind as man. That's verse 23. This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Male and female, they are the complementary opposites of each other, of the same kind of creature. There is no other creature on this planet that we are capable of reproducing with. And there is no other creature that is like us in either our biology or our spirit, and especially in our spirit, which is the most important part. But then you also have this verse 24 here: man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast or cleave or cling to his wife. You grow up and you leave your family. And hey, Buck, welcome. We're finishing up Genesis 2 here. I'm glad you could join us. This verse 24, this was a hard lesson for me. I mean, I knew it. I knew the verse was there. I knew what it meant. I understood the lesson on an intellectual level, but this is something that I actually struggled with when I first got married, is leaving family behind, leaving family out of it, really, and being the man, being the husband, being the person that I needed to be for my wife without all of the extra input from my family. Now, that's not to say that I don't love my family, and that's not to say that my family was trying to do bad things or whatever. What it means is that I did not leave the way that I should have left. Eventually did. Moved all the way to Florida, in fact. But I was still trying to be a son on equal par to being a husband. I was still trying to be a brother on equal par to being a husband. And you can't do that. That's what this verse is talking about. Because the man and the woman, the husband and the wife, are the primary relationship for the furtherance of the species, for or the kind, or all of the things that go into that particular special relationship. We see that in Ephesians 5, the special relationship between the husband and wife, as a type pointing to the church and Christ. The husband has to leave family behind and form a new family and figure it out and put her first. He has to put her first. He has to put her above mother and father. He has to put her above brothers and sisters. He has to do everything he can to be the companion to her and see to her needs first. And I admit, that's something I struggled with. That was not something I did right at the beginning of my relationship with my wife, and I deal with the consequences of that. Still love my wife. We'll be married 15 years this August. I think both of us have done a lot of growing together. And I know that I still have a lot of growing to do. You don't stop growing till you die. Only dead things don't grow, right? But this was a lesson I needed to learn, and to an extent still kind of learn. Still picking up things here and there, but I understand it a lot better now here as well as up here. The last verse, and then we'll wrap up. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. Well, why would they be ashamed? Number one, they're the only two people around. And number two, public nudity isn't sinful. In fact, the only thing that was sinful was eating of that tree. And so, anything that they did at this point in time, not that they would have been able to conceive of it really, because a lot of sin is a learned behavior. But at this point in time, really the only thing they could have done was eaten of that tree. And so we see this nakedness here, and they're out traipsing about, and there's a lot to be said about that. My wife and I both are real big believers in the going out and being barefoot and connecting to the earth. There's an electromagnetic field that surrounds the planet. Your rubber soles protect you from that, and so you don't get the benefits of connecting to the earth. And that's not some new age mumbo jumbo kind of thing. It's just physics. But there's something to be said for being out in the sun Hey, Stephen. Just wrapping up Genesis 2 here. You caught us early on, and now you're catching us at the end here. But anyway, there's something to be said for just shorts and a t-shirt and spending time outside. Get out in the sun, let your skin soak it up. Get out and play in the dirt and be outside. I know this is something I struggle with. Such a computer nerd. I mean, you can tell I don't get enough exercise. But one of my focuses this year, as soon as we get some sun back, is to really try to push to get outside and be outside more with the kids. And this is wrapped up in this verse 25. They were both naked in Eden, wandering around in all of creation, and it wasn't a big deal. I'm not saying I'm going to go around naked. You don't have to worry about driving by my house. But what I am saying is that get outside and soak up the sun, and leave your shoes off, and enjoy creation, and enjoy what God made for us. So anyway, that's Genesis 2. Not too much controversy there. And Genesis 3 is probably going to be a little bit more rough. But if you watch this and you have questions, leave them behind. I'll get to them, and we can talk about things. But for those of you who tuned in and studied a little bit with me tonight, I appreciate it. And I guess I'll see y'all whenever I get around to Genesis 3.